it's time for me to introduce today's speaker. Today's speaker is Vidyalakshmi Venkatraman, who is a talent development at Sharjah Investment and Development Authority. She is a master degree holder in human resource, offering 12 plus years of distinguished experience. She has worked closely with business leaders in strategizing various HR policies and implemented many successfully in organizations having employee strength ranging from 500 to 5,000. Now, this is a bit that information that you see in the PowerPoint presentation, but I have more to say. Now, she has been there with one of the largest retail, that is for Ashok Leyland, and she's got hands-on experience in handling and dealing employee relationships, performance management, succession planning, compensation, benchmarking, international development, and exit in the function of HR across various industries and geographical experience. To say more, she has got a name a few association in where her career journey has started with, as you see, a giant future group and moved to telecom in Aircel, and then traveled to UAE and joined manufacturing setup and worked for different companies with manufactured defense vehicles, commercial vehicles. Last association was Ashok Leyland. I hand over the stage to Vidya. Now, before I hand over, I would like you to say a few words, and then I have few questions from job seekers that I have received, so that I would allow you to share the information to the job seekers. May I request you to please take over the stage?
Good evening, everyone. That's a very lovely, warm welcome that was given by Mr. Venzil Fernanedes. Very motivating speech with whatever interest that you have and how beautifully you have actually collated information about me and had presented to the crowd. So, so today it's one of the most important topic, because why we all are here to, of course, make money and to actually be legally employed, to be successful and to reach some kind of goal that we have in our mind, right? So for that, what are the do's and don'ts? Are we going to follow all the regulations? If not, what are the consequences that we face? And what is the right thing to do? Whom do we approach? How do we go about it? And things like that are some insights that I would like to share from whatever experience that I've got. Like you rightly said, I would like to understand what kind of knowledge that I should be sharing with you lovely people. So I would definitely need kind of questions which are going to be coming in first. I would definitely entertain questions in between on the chat box or addressed directly to me. That's perfectly fine. And at the end as well, if that is a requirement. But I would like to kickstart the session with Q&A so that I know where to focus my speech for the next half an hour, 45 minutes on, and what are the important things that I should stress upon and touch upon so that people get a little detailed information or valuable information on. So, yeah.
Thank you, Vidya. So I have got so many questions from job seekers ranging yesterday when I did post my video, and I am so glad to share this. Now I have so many questions, but I will first start with 5 questions. Okay. So the first question is, what are the prerequisites for employment in UAE? The second question is, what are the types of employment contracts? Followed by that, what are the conditions that need to be specified in employee contracts? And what are the rules pertaining to the employment ban in UAE? And one of the questions that I frequently get from job seekers and that I would like to put across: what do you want a job seeker to focus on when it comes to UAE labor laws when he enters for the first time in UAE? Over to you, Vidya.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Venzil. So you have rightly started off with the right kind of question, because anybody who comes to the UAE with a lot of dreams will have a lot of apprehensions as to where to start, how to start, whom I can actually approach. Should I be aware of certain things as an expat, or is it going to be just as normal as a national, or is it going to be, is there a differentiation that is going to be made between a national and an expat, and so on and so forth. So I think I would definitely touch upon whatever questions that you had asked, and stress upon few regulations and violation consequences and people who come here for the first time, right? So I'd like to start off uh, with whatever little knowledge that I have in terms of how you kickstart when you are a newbie in the UAE, okay, seeking for a job, right? So what the presentation completely that I'm going to actually give the audience is going to be totally on the legislation perspective. So what all does it actually cover? So obviously it has to cover what an employee and employer's relationship should be. Once a person lands in the UAE in whatever kind of visa, tourist, be it employment, be it visit visa, whatever, what are the things that he can enjoy, or what are the things that he can actually do or be limited with? And what kind of, if I find an employment, what kind of contract, or is there a contract at all that is existent when I join an organization? And what kind of rules and regulations that I should follow, and what should I be aware of when I conduct myself in an organization? And what are the protection and safety elements that I have to keep in mind when I get into an office premises? What kind of working the hours that we should follow? What is the frequency of weekly off that I'll be getting in each and every company if I change, or is it going to be 1 day, 2 day, things like that? And of course, I'll also touch upon what are the benefits legally that are mandatorily given by the employers to the employees. Yeah, and then finally, I'll also touch upon if you want to actually resign, or God forbid, if you actually face a situation where you are terminated, what are the benefits that you can expect from the employer? So, and also the present scenario calls for understanding what are the corona regulations that one should be aware of, because there are a lot of people who are really not aware of where to actually approach, how they will be knowing, is it okay to work from home, and so on and so forth. So I'll touch upon those elements of employment as well during this pandemic. So that's how this presentation is going to be, right? So now what I would like to actually understand from your question, the very important question is, I'm a newbie in the UAE and I'm on a visit visa or a tourist visa. And I got lucky and I found a job because I have all the right kind of skills and prerequisites as mentioned by the employer for that particular role. Now, what do I do to change from a tourist visa to a resident employment visa? So what I do generally is provide all the information that I have to my employer, which means I provide your passport, your photograph, so that it can be put on your stamping page on the passport. You provide information like which part of India or whichever country that you're coming from. And you also say that, okay, this is my visa timeline. That is what I'm currently holding on to. So how long do I have so that it can be, fastened to get the resident visa done. So once that is done, you can very well stay inside the country if you have the time to actually stay in that particular visa that you have landed inside the country, right? So what happens then is the employer goes for a quota approval. When I say quota, there are regulations which says that each job role, right, so has to be validated with the Ministry of Labor and Human Resource and Emiratisation Ministry, saying that this is a requirement of our company. So we are applying for this particular job role quota. So kindly approve with whatever documentations has to go through, like I mentioned before. So once that is approved, you will have a work permit in place. And once the work permit is there, you are legally allowed to work for that particular employer. So that is the step one of finding an employment legally and putting yourself to get a residence visa via employment in the UAE, right? So during this process, you're having a dual it's not a dual visa, but it is like you're on a tourist visa, but still you're able to get your residence visa processed. Why? Because there is a work permit element that is involved, right? So then what happens is there is something called a status change that is done. Why there is a status change? Because you can always remain in the country and still do the status change, or you can exit the country and come back. Why there is a status change required? Because you are moving out of your tourist category to an employment category, or for that matter, anybody who actually is a dependent. Let's say that a daughter is sponsored by her or her parent, and she wants to move on to an employment, and she gets into the employment visa. So there is a status change. So I am no more a dependent, but I am an employee of this particular organization. So that is what, in a layman term, that I can actually explain as what a status change will look like. And then you get your national ID process, which we call it as Emirates ID. And then you go through your medical screening, which is 100% mandatory here. There are certain tests which are mandatory, and you will automatically be going through that. And once everything comes without any problems, then you will have your visa stamped on your passports. So that is the stage where that you are allowed to say that you are an employee and a resident in the country. So that's how the process from tourist to employment actually gets processed. So now when I talk about what are the things that you should be aware of when you get into an employment, right? So like I said that what all I'm going to cover. Now I'm going to say that things that you should be aware of is definitely, I already touched upon that, you should be medically fit, right? And you should definitely be, these are legal requirements, and you should obviously be free of any credit worthiness, meaning there are people who actually take a lot of loan and credit cards and just vanish away because of multiple other reasons. So if there is a case already filed against you, then it will be a problem for you to land in an employment. So you should be free of that as well. And you should definitely not have any criminal offense in your name. And first and foremost, obviously, you have to be 18 years and above. I think that is applicable in multiple other countries as well. And you should be free from any kind of bans that you can imagine. Like, for example, certain nationalities cannot actually come and work in the UAE. So you should be not a part of that particular nationality so that you can benefit. So so sometimes what happens is that some nationalities would have already traveled. All of a sudden, there will be a crisis where this particular nationalities cannot get quota from an employer. So those kind of things you should be well aware of, even before going and approaching for a job offer, right? And one more important thing which people tend to miss out is education certificates. So even recently, I heard it in the news and I read it in Khaleej Times saying that there are a lot of people who are trying to produce false certificates, basically fake ones. So there are a lot of people who had recently done that, and that is why the law has become a little more stringent now, that you might have to attest it, but it's not like 100% requirement. But the more you are sorted in terms of your documentation, it is easier for you to actually land up in a job and get your visa also in place. So that is how you land up in a job legally. So these are the quick requirements that you may have to remember. But beyond the legal perspective of whatever I have told you, the age, the medical fitness, the criminal offense, or the credit worthiness, or the bans and the education certificates, preference will be given for people who are multilinguistic, preferably Arabic, obviously, because in the UAE, that's the widely spoken language. So obviously, if you have Arabic knowledge, you will definitely have an upper hand while looking for a job, especially the front-ending jobs. And obviously, you should be contributing to whatever job requirement is posted or being sought after by the employer. And you should also be aware of few social media rules, because this country restricts certain websites and things like that. So you cannot actually use, in fact, for that matter, even VPN is not allowed legally in the country. So how you're going to deal with those, and for you to not land up in any kind of trouble, it is better that you are aware of all these social media rules as well, though it is not mandatory or a prerequisite of an employment. And obviously, the most important and the sensitive element I personally feel is this is a very dynamic country. When I say that the population of expat is very much higher, so you should be aware of how you actually approach multicultural background as well. So you should appreciate people from any part of the globe, whatever their behavior is. So it'll take a little time for you to understand what the tone means, what the body language means, and things like that. But it is perfectly fine. But if you can actually appreciate those things, those are the small changes that you can actually make and create amazing impression about yourself when you're seeking an employment. So that is about the legal entry and landing in a job. So Venzil, tell me what else, if you have as a question, if you have, please do present to me. Otherwise, I'll just carry on with whatever I have prepared.
Yes, I do have a question because while you were answering this, I got a question from one of the member here, and the question here is: as per the law, is the company supposed to bear these charges, or for the status change and Emirates ID, or is the employee supposed to bear the charges?
Right. So what happens is Emirates ID is something which is related to. So I always keep it very simple for our understanding. That is nothing but you have your work permit, which allows you to legally be employed by the organization. You have the visa, which allows you legally to stay inside the country. Right? So when I say stay and to be able to work, why I put in these two boxes is because, see, an employer is obligated to actually provide whatever benefits of employment that you are supposed to be with, right? But whereas when it comes to visa, along with the employment permit or the work permit that you get, what happens is you do not have a different sponsor for you to stay inside the country. It is going to be the same. So the person who is actually applying for your work permit and the person who's going to let you stay inside the country are one and the same. Right? So what happens is the national ID falls into the category of the residence or the ability to live legally in the country. So obviously it is a priority for an individual and not for the employment purposes. So obviously there are a lot of companies which pays for Emirates ID as well, but it is legally not a requirement for a company to bear the expenses of Emirates ID. And so is the case with status change. There are a lot of companies which follow that as a part of the visa process itself. They give whatever ticket either to fly out to a different destination and come back, or within the country, they just do a status change saying that this person is actually moving from this particular sponsor and work permit manager to this particular manager sponsor. So that is how it happens. So it is totally under the obligation of the employer, and it is not a mandatory spend from an employer's end. Yeah.
Okay, so now I will be moving the questions. First of all, thank you very much for the for answering that question. I hope the audience who asked the question
Got a
have
clarity on
been
that.
answered. Clarity on that. Even I was a bit confused with that question because even I have not gone through it, but I did have a scenario, but that's a different thing. Now my question comes to you is based on the termination. Now this is not specific to termination, but this is something related to recent views that might have happened because of the pandemic or for some other reason. Now, would changes in the structure of a business or its ownership constitute a termination of an employment contract? Followed by that, what are the rights of an employee on termination of employment contract?
What are the rights of an employee on termination of an employment contract? Perfect. Okay, so to put you to easily understand, couple of examples I would like to give. Okay, so I'm employed with an organization which is a private sector, and it is a manufacturing setup. Okay, so what happens is the business is not very flourishing, unfortunately. So there is a company which is showing a lot of interest in buying that particular company, right? And taking over the entire setup as it is, right? So as the X company, which is going to take over the present organization that I am associated with, that ex-employer will definitely do an analysis of what is this total population that I may have to actually take over in terms of human resources. Correct? So what happens when that comes to picture? Meaning, obviously, he will look at it as a cost, right? So they will evaluate what is the current laws and things like that, and they will decide on how they want to structure their newly acquired business. So there are two aspects to it as an employee for me in this. One is my contract. What does it say? So if my contract says that at any point, okay, I can be transferred, or I can be issued with new employment within the organization. Like there are a lot of companies which are group companies and can change from one particular company to the other, right? So there are employment contracts which clearly mentions that you definitely will be or may be requested to actually go from this particular company to other company under the same group at any point in time, and you will be obligated to do so, right? And whatever compensation and benefits, blah, 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 all that will be as a part of the contract that is already signed off mutually, right? So at that, if that is the case, then obviously, you know, I don't have a say as an employee, but just to take up whatever employment, provided the other company that I'm getting transferred and getting a new employment is under the same umbrella or under the same group of companies. Now, what happens when I have already spent with this organization 2 years and I'm on an unlimited contract and I'm moving to the sister concern of the same group under the same group, but with a different company. So if that employment contract is going to be newly made under that particular company under the same group, obviously it will be a new contract, right? So it will not be a continuous process or continuous employment. So what happens? There is a break. You can either get into one kind of two kinds of options. One, either you speak to your employer, who is your current employer, and understand what are the benefits that you have currently accrued and be eligible for, right? You get the paycheck in terms of end of service right there once your cancellation is done of your employment permit or work permit and your visa, and get on to the X company, which is the next company, right? If you're not wanting to cut up your accrued benefits, what you can do is say that, can you please transfer? That is possible, right? So that is very much possible. But these are all possible only if it is under the same group, because they will have the understanding. But if you are not under the same group, you can always ask, what is it the business actually is going to be doing in the future? So do I, as this particular, like I'm a sales manager, so as in this role, will I have a requirement in that company? If the company says, sorry, you're not doing good, you're going to transfer the ownership to some other company, then the employment definitely comes to an end, because the company may not be interested, the company which is going to take over may not be interested to take over your particular role as well. So in that scenario, it comes to an end. So definitely, if there is a change in the complete business decision, if it is under the same group of companies, then it is possible from one to the other to transfer the benefits or to actually get the check and secure your accrual of benefits. But if it is a different organization under different management and sponsorship, there are high chances that you may have to end the contract because of whatever business decisions has been taken. So I hope that I answered the first part of the question. And I think you asked about the termination benefits on an employment contract, right? So before getting into termination benefits, I would like to just touch upon what kind of contracts that we generally could deal with as an employee. So there are multiple options in UAE, which is definitely a boon to an employee who's looking for a job. One is a full-time employee who goes to job at night, like probably 9 to 5 or whatever, right? Another one is part-time employment. That also is something which is similar to full-time employment, but it's just that it is shorter hours. It definitely cannot go beyond 8 hours, because 8 hours is the minimum requirement that any full-time employment contract would demand, right? So anything lesser than 8 hours is actually categorized as part-time employment contract. And we also have something called as freelancers who can actually get selected as a consultant or a retainer, whatever term that you can fancily come up with. But yeah, if you are under your freelance visa, it will be definitely coming under the freelance consultant employment. So the only difference between part-time, full-time and the freelance employment is nothing but the contract. So when it comes to employment contract, it will have all the benefits. You will have your specified salary, you will have your weekly offs mentioned, and etc. So on and so forth. Whatever salary that you're going to get, what is the frequency of the salary that is going to be paid, and what are the benefits if you're going to get airfare, or if you're going to be provided with any other benefits, and so on and so forth. But when it comes to freelance, the term itself is very clear. Freelance meaning I am coming with a visa to your organization as a consultant. Because I have certain know-how, my services may be required, or it could be a niche job, or whatever the case is, right? Or it's going to be a project-based job. So what you will do is, as an employer, hire me as a consultant or a retainer. So what I say is, I will get you an agreement, but not with a contract, because I have my own terms in terms of living inside the inside the country. So I don't have to actually rely upon the employer to provide legally any kind of permission or a paperwork to live inside the country, because I have sorted that for myself, right? So the only obligation that I have towards the organization is to comply to whatever agreed terms that I have written and signed off with the organization. So what happens there is, as a freelancer, I may not be enjoying the same benefits as what a full-time or a part-time employee will be enjoying. That's because it's simple. I am a consultant, but the other person is an employee. There itself, the beginning of differentiation happens, right? So now as a freelancer, so why should I be a freelancer? Why I can be a freelancer is because I have no tie-ups. I don't have to be committed to one organization. Okay, so I am not really sure what kind of job that I want to. So some people can be skilled, and some people at the same time can be having different kind of qualification. Like for example, I'm an architecture, okay, but I can also do some coding because I have done some coding and I have some specific interest toward it, so I've developed that. So I can be a coder, and I also can actually go and design, coffee shops and whatever kind of civil options that I have as an architect, right? So if I am actually labeled as an employee as an architect, probably there is a restriction of non-competition, right? Probably the employer would say that, I don't want you to actually go this early because we have certain projects. So I will not have that liberty to explore options and also have a wide range of my interests being served, right? So these are the advantages of being a freelancer, and that is why you don't have to actually be complied with any kind of benefits like an employee enjoys, right? So these are the different types of contract or agreements that I had explained to you on the freelance front. Now, what happens when my employer actually terminates me when I'm on a employment contract, which is full-time? So let's assume that I'm on a limited contract. Limited, as the name very clearly says, it is very much time-bound. It has got a start date, it has got an end date, right? So with the start and end date, it very much restricts the employer and employee to come into an agreement that, okay, this is the maximum time that employee can work with this organization. If they have to actually continue after the 2 years, then they have to mutually agree and come into a new agreement. So an employment contract will have it must have your salary definitely mentioned on it. Your name, your passport, your basically legal documentation details mentioned on it, like your date of birth, your family name, your passport number, your validity of the passport, or your nationality, and all those things. That is what I mean by saying documentation, legal documentation details, right? And then comes to the employment terms, which is your salary. So salary is always put into 3 or 4 categories: base salary, your HRA, which is nothing but your housing allowance, and your transportation or conveyance, whatever term that employer wants to call it as. And anything else that the employer is willing to provide can be turned under any allowance that employer wants to give. So these are the main 4 categories which are followed in this particular part of the globe, right? So basic always has to be a minimum of 30%, and it can go up to 60% or 70%. It is totally dependent on the employer. So why basic wage is very important is because all the end of service benefits is going to be calculated based on your basic wage and not on your gross salary, which is the total one. That's a very, very key aspect of understanding what kind of benefit that you're going to be paid at the end of your employment, right? And also your leave details has to be clearly mentioned. Is it going to be working days or is it going to be calendar days, and how many number of days that you're going to be eligible in a year. And always leave is mentioned per year and not per month, right? And you may also have details like where exactly the office is located, meaning the location of the organization, right? And you also will be given, if the employer is willing to provide airfare, that also can be mentioned in the employment contract. Any other additional benefits? Okay, there are employment contracts which I have seen that, say that your family's visa expenses also will be covered. And there are employment contracts which says that non-competition very strictly being followed with certain organizations. So all these, so mandatory things are whatever I have told you in the first part of the session. So here I'm talking about which may or may not be included in the contract. So now when I touched upon the basic wage, so as a terminated employee under limited contract, I have not completed my 2 years term, right? So I want to end the contract as an employee. So what happens there? So if I don't finish the contract, I may not be eligible for end of service benefit. It's as simple as that. End of service benefit here means your gratuity primarily. So your payment of gratuity will not happen under limited contract if you have not completed your term. So that's the biggest loss for an employee. Why people generally get into limited contract is because it is for a definite period. I don't have to think about a long-term plan. And it is also for the employer to cut down on attrition if they face a lot of attrition problems in an organization, right? So what happens if I finish my contract and the contract comes to an end, right? So then I will definitely be provided with your termination benefits, which is called as your payment of gratuity, which is the primary element in your EOS. So there you get your 21 days basic wage, which I just a few minutes before I explained. Your basic wage is the most important element of your gratuity or any payment for that matter, right? So you get 21 days basic wage, okay? So that is what is going to contribute to your gratuity. Now let's say you are an unlimited contract. Your unlimited contract will have benefits of gratuity provided you have completed your 1 year. So minimum requirement of the term in unlimited contract, either the employer lets you go or the employee chooses to go, is 1 year for you to be eligible for your gratuity. So there what happens is, so there are elements to the payment of gratuity under unlimited contract. One is the first year completion, but I have not. So 1 to 3 years, the bracket is like that: 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5th year, and finishing on completion of 5th year and above, it will be certain days basic wage which is going to be paid. So the 4 categories that I told you, first begins with 0 because I have not completed 1 year. Second category is 1 to 3 years. If I fall under the service of being associated with a company between 1 and 3 years, then obviously I'll be eligible for 7 days basic gratuity. So how does it, just a quick, I'm not sure if it will be easier for you to understand when I say it, because it is mathematically explained. Okay, so your basic wage, let's take it as 5,000. Okay, so 5,000 divided by 365, because you're calculating on an annual basis, right? So divided by 365 into 12, you're calculating for per day, so that you are accurate in terms of knowing your number of service years, right? So you arrive at 1 day salary. So 5,000 divided by 365 into 12 into, let's assume I have completed 2.5 years. Into 2.5, that is nothing but the number of years, okay? 5,000 divided by 365 into 12 into number of years of service into my eligibility days, which is nothing but 7, because I have not completed 3. I fall into the first category, right? So it's 5,000 divided by 365 into 12 into 2.5 into 7. So whatever figure that you get, okay, so that is going to be your gratuity payment at the end of your contract termination, right? So if I have confused, I'm so sorry, but if you do the simple mathematical calculation, it will be more easier for you to register in your head and you don't have to really refer to anybody, right? So you have your 1 day salary, okay, multiplied by the eligible days, which is 7 days basic, multiplied by number of years of service. So that's about it. Okay, so this is how it is. So if I have completed, like, if I fall into the category of 3 to 5, then obviously I'll be eligible for 14 days. So you have to replace the 7 with 14. And if I have fallen into the category of the third, then obviously I'll be eligible for 21 days. Now here comes the catch. If I have completed 7.5 years, right? So what happens is the first 5 years will be calculated based on 21. Okay, so and then you add up from the 6th to 7.5 years, whatever gratuity on 30 days basic. You are eligible for a full term of gratuity once you finish your 6 years, right? So then you added these two, and that is how your gratuity calculated once you go above the last slab, which is 5th year and above, right? So yeah, so the next part of employment benefits on termination on I think I covered both limited and unlimited. If I missed out, please do let me know, Venzil, if I have missed out any element. Okay. So apart from the gratuity, you're also going to be eligible for your leave accrued that you have gone through the service. Now let's say, okay, so in limited and unlimited, it's going to be the same in terms of leave. So if I've got 30 calendar days of leave that is going to be given as a benefit to me, and I have utilized only 10 days and I have got 20 days balance, what happens there is I will be paid based on my base salary and HRA, but not on allowances or conveyances. But if I don't complete my first 6 months, first year, but only the 6 months I have completed in my service, then I'll be eligible for 2 days in per month, meaning I have completed 8 months in an organization and I am resigning, right? So now what happens is I will be given the leave on the eligibility of 2 days a month and not on 2.5 days a month, which is the 30 days annual leave calculation. So if you're not able to follow it, please stop me and ask me what it is, okay? So 30 days is the mandatory leave that is given by the law, right? So 30 days is nothing but 2.5 days every month you're eligible, provided you have completed 1 year of minimum service. But if I have not completed 1 year service, I have completed probation, but I have not completed 1 year service, then the leave will be given only on the basis of 2 days per month. So that is the difference between 1 year completion and just your probation completion and quitting there. So that is also one of the benefits that you will get at the end of your employment. Another benefit, or probably it's not a benefit, it's an obligation that has to be provided by the employer when the employer let go of an employee is, see, let's assume that I'm an employer and I have employed one of you, right? So what happens is, it happens so that I have brought you inside the country by providing you visa and work permit, correct? So what happens is, it is my obligation to actually ensure that you're not overstaying on my visa. Why? Because I, as an employer, will have consequences if I let you be on that visa when you're not legally employed with me. So I have to cancel it and I have to ensure that you leave the country or you get your status changed with some other sponsor or an employer. It's my obligation. So to avoid this particular liability as an employer on me, what I will have to do is, I'll provide a one-way air ticket so that I will ensure that you are off to your home country. It's an obligation as an employer for me and it is mandatory, right? But if I have an employee who is resigned on his or her own will, I don't have that obligation, but still, as an employer, the liability is on me because the visa of the employee is provided by me, right? So I have to ensure the employee is not overstaying after the cancellation. If the employee overstays, there is a chance that my system will get blocked. Why? Because they don't want anybody who does not have a legal paperwork to be inside the country, especially in an employment setting. So that is why I use the word obligation by the employer. Okay, but if the employer is actually terminating the employee, it is not only the obligation, but it is also a mandatory requirement. But if the employee is willingly resigning, then obviously it becomes an obligation of an employer to provide an air ticket. right? So that's the difference between airfare in termination and in the resignation scenarios. So what else do you want me to speak about in terms of termination, in case if I have missed out any?
I think you covered everything from the start till the end, and I loved it because I really go through every line when it comes to a contract, and that is something that I would suggest and I would advise everyone. When you sign the paper, go through the contracts and then only sign if you are happy with what you have agreed with the HR. Now,
Absolutely.
I have a question. Someone from Ravi here. I heard in UAE the authorities have allowed the spouse to work on dependent visa. Please clarify.
That's correct. As a dependent, okay, I can actually work with a legal work permit. So, like I said right in the beginning of the session, I always put two boxes to make the understanding easier for us. Okay, work permit is nothing but which allows you to work in the country with an employer. Visa is nothing but it allows you to stay inside the country. So it can be from different origins. Am I correct? I can have the, that is why the freelance also comes as an option, correct? I can have my own visa, but I'll still have an agreement with my employer to say that, you know what, this is what is my privilege as a freelancer. I don't have to be just with one employer. I don't want to be with a employer having tie-ups saying that, okay, I'm committed to you and things like that. So visa and work employment are two different things. And of course, what the gentleman has asked is perfectly right and is very much relevant here at this present scenario. It is definitely permitted by the law. So as a dependent, if I'm a spouse, I am allowed to work on any kind of company which provides me a legal work permit. So did I answer the question?
Yes, there is a response from him saying thank you. Now, I know that this question, I know the answer for this question, but I would still love to get the clarity.
Yes,
Can
please.
an employee, can an employee work for two companies at the same time?
Absolutely, because I just touched upon that, right? So part-time employment, full-time employment, and freelance. So when I call it as part-time and full-time employment, those are very specific to employment. So I'm a full-time employee. I work for this particular organization. Okay, so my work gets over after 8 hours or 9 hours or whatever. And then I am very passionate and I want to explore a lot of opportunities and I want money, which is the most basic thing everybody would be looking forward to. So I am looking for a part-time job, right? So I cracked some interviews and I have got a part-time assignment as well. The only mandatory requirement here is I must insist the part-time employer who is hiring me to go through the legal paperwork of preparing a part-time work employment. So part-time work employment contract and the full-time work employment contract can be one and the same in terms of what all does it hold, like, or should hold, right? So your salary, how much remuneration that you're going to get as a part-time employee, are you eligible to get your weekly offs? If yes, then what is the frequency of your weekly offs? Are you eligible to get your leave? Yes, then you mentioned your number of days of leave and your passport details, like the documentation details are all going to be present in your part-time employment contract. The only difference is the number of hours is definitely lesser than 8. And the last bit of it is freelance. Like I said, there will not be a contract, it will be an agreement. The difference between contract and agreement is negotiable in nature, right? But contract is already written and governed by the local laws, right? So that's the only difference. So because it is an agreement, I have an upper hand to negotiate however I want. So if you are an amazing negotiator, you can get whatever you want from the company that is hiring you as a consultant or a retainer. So those are the differences between part-time, full-time, and if a person can actually work for multiple employers or dual employment, as anybody could say.
Thank you very much for touching upon that, and I hope that answers your question. Now, for the audience, I have received so many questions. I'm overwhelmed with so many questions. I will try to cover up so many questions as possible as with Vidya. However, if we do not, we will get back to you personally. So one of the questions from the audience is, If I'm on visit visa and if the employer promises to provide an employment visa, but after 3 months that gets declined with no pay as well, what could be done in this case for an individual? Now, the reason this
So,
question is because
hmm.
people on visit visa get fooled and get exploited. So, what do you advise?
So, one thing is to secure a job offer before getting into any kind of conversation or promises which are just verbally made. So when you take to the court of law, nothing actually is going to work or speak for itself other than a contract, legal paperwork. Maybe your job offer is not going to be the final answer, but still it will hold some kind of weightage when you take it to the court of law. But at the same time, when you are on a visit visa, you have come on your own, right? You have not been brought by an employer. Okay, so then it is your obligation to leave the country and not overstay. The liability is on the individual who travels inside the country and chooses to stay just because he was promised or she was promised to get an offer and an employment contract. So you need to be very careful in terms of who is approaching you, if the job offer is happening, if the job offer is given, what is the timeline that you're going to get? Because especially on tourist and visit visa holders, the complete liability is on the individual and not on the employer, unless a contract is made.
Thank you very much for the answer, and for the ones who got the answer, who asked the question, I hope you
I
have
hope,
got the
yeah.
clarity. Now I have a question when it comes to the ban. Okay. Now there are two questions, and I'll frame it to you to make it very simple. Now, in case of a work resignation, and the employee has not yet completed 2 years, will he or she face a ban under the limited or unlimited contract? And the second question is, if the employee resigns after their probation period, can an employer place a ban on the employee?
So both the scenarios are possible. But on what grounds is the employee being terminated by the employer is something which we'll have to touch upon. So if, the employee has got any kind of problems that has been created by him or her, then the employee definitely will not have any kind of benefits, obviously, and also can get a ban. So what kind of ban? That also totally depends on the employer. So if the employer is extremely upset with the behavior of the employee, then obviously there can be really bad consequences of not even having a chance to enter the country back once he or she leaves. But if it is just because you have got employment elsewhere and you are just going before completion of contract, and as an employer I'm at a loss, there is a possibility that I would say that you cannot go and work with my competition for the next whatever number of years. So that is also a kind of ban, right? So that is possible. That is very much possible by an employer, just because the employee refuses to actually finish the contract term just because he or she has got a better employment opportunity. So it's very much possible, but there are ways to work around it and lift the ban. So simple things which can be done by the employee is find a job which is a little better off than the existing job. When I say better job, it is nothing but in terms of your position, meaning if I'm a sales manager, if I get a senior manager or a technical manager or whatever, better sounding or better in terms of grade, then obviously, one part of the ban can be removed. Another one is obviously if I'm drawing a 5,000 salary, if I'm going to get an 8,000 salary, obviously there is a change. And so the law also agrees and accepts that, yes, so this person has actually made the decision of moving out of this employment to the other because of a better opportunity, right? Very simplest which can be worked out is if you are finding a job in free zone. Okay, but that doesn't mean free zone does not have any employment contracts and does not fall under the law. Okay, you will definitely be governed by the labor laws there as well, but they will have their own set of rules and regulations in free zone. But if you're going from a mainland to a free zone, then obviously you will not be able to face a ban, meaning automatically it can be lifted, right? And if there is a mutual agreement to stop and negotiate on the contract ban, best thing, right? So nothing can be, I firmly believe a person who will be able to negotiate and get things straight is definitely out of any kind of problem and can actually win amazingly well. So yeah, so that is also one of the options which is very much easily under your control. So these are the few things that you can actually work around to remove the ban. But yes, it is very much possible for you to get a ban if you are getting any kind of disciplinary action taken by the employer based on Article 120.
So ideally, I would assume with the explanations that we have gone through, you should be a good negotiator, no matter if you're in sales or not, right?
I will try my best to negotiate to get the best.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, so I have a question who has WhatsApped me right now.
Right.
Okay, and this question comes from one of the HR's friend. I have an international driving license from a country which is not in UAE, but that belongs to me. Does it have or hold a value?
It depends on which country you're coming from, for the simple reason that I'm an Indian. Okay, when I came here, when I went for the driving school option, they said that if you have a valid driving license from your country, can you just produce it? So they verified that and said that, okay, because you have a valid license and it has passed through so many years, you will have to only go through this many classes. Right? So there are multiple other countries which have this privilege of not even having to go through classes at all, but just convert and happily drive. Right? So it totally depends on which nationality you are. So definitely certain nationalities will have a better advantage over other nationalities. So it is totally dependent on the Road and Transport Authority under the Dubai government, or whichever emirate government that you are approaching for your driver's license. Did I answer the question?
Yes, perfectly. Because even I have Indian driving license. That's why I wanted even to get the clarity. Thanks a lot, Vidya, for that clarification. Now, there's a question coming from a person who has gone through this crisis and he wants to get a resolution from you. That's what he just messaged me. He
I'll
says,
try my
my
best.
2 year. Yes. So he says, my 2 year limited contract got over in September 2020, and the company sent me non-renewal contract on email when I was in India, stuck due to COVID pandemic. So my contract got over while I was in Mumbai. However, my final settlement is still awaiting. Now, what course of action should I take? Because I'm following up from a long time, but there's no positive response as it's been 5 months. Should I visit a UAE embassy in Mumbai to seek their assistance to claim my final settlement? Or is there any online website to log in and file a grievance case?
I'm really sorry for the friend who is currently facing this problem. Couple of things I need to know is, one is, so did he or she go on leave while being on the employment contract active? And while on leave, did the contract expire? Okay. So if that is the case, then I think the liability is on both the sides. Why? Because when you know that in a month's time that your employment contract is getting over, obviously when you're wanting to get back, you should definitely have some kind of document to enter the country, right? So otherwise it will be very big challenge for you to get into the country. So was that discussed first? So that is something which I would like to know. Assuming that you went and got stuck because of the lockdown, okay, but your plan to return was very much within the limit of the term of the employment contract, then yes, there is a possibility, not possibility, there is very much rules and rights that are given by the Ministry of Labor and by the Human Resource and Emiratization Ministry, stating that these are the things that you will be eligible for. Because you're in a limited contract, if it is not mutually agreed upon on renewal terms, okay, email definitely will work very much good. But yes, if it is not mutually agreed, then it is a problem, right? Now, what has been told to you when you approach them for your end of service benefits? Did they say that you're going to be paid, you're not going to be paid, you're going to be denied? What is it, as a communication you've got from your employer? Right? You've only got from your employer that your employment contract comes to an end and it is not going to be mutually agreed? Or has it also been mentioned that you will be paid your end of service at so and so date or whatever time, blah blah blah? So if I have a little more clarity on these questions, I think I'll be able to address. But two assumptions I'm making
Yes.
is, yeah.
So he did respond and he said, I went on regular annual leave on December 2019. Uh, I'm not sure why he mentioned 2019. It should have been 2020. but could not go back to UAE due to pandemic.
Yeah, that's perfectly. No, December 2019 is right, because the whole Corona episode came up only from March in the UAE, and I think April or May in India, if I'm not wrong, if my memory is right. Okay, so it's quite possible maybe he went. But when was his employment contract coming to an end? Sorry, I think I missed to register that in my head.
That happens to be in September 2020.
Okay, so there was a good 1 year time for his contract to actually come to an end from the time that he has gone on leave, right? So he
Absolutely.
was
So I'll
assuming
get,
that so he was assuming
yes.
that he'll get back as per whatever annual leave plan that he has made earlier and come back. So unfortunately, this lockdown happened. It is not just with one country. Pandemic hit across the globe, so you can't really put the entire blame on the employer. I'm definitely not supporting and taking the side of the employer, but I'm just giving you a perspective of how to approach the situation. Now, because of the pandemic, a lot of employers have decided to let go of employees as well. And unfortunately, you were on leave, but legally, an employee who is on leave cannot be terminated. But in case of this pandemic hit scenario, there are few regulations which are levied upon and said that can be relaxed. But still, the Ministry of Labor and Human Resource Implementation has said that, okay, if there is a possibility to retain them and give unpaid leave, that is still okay than actually letting go of employees, right? But here the scenario is such that he is away from the very existence of UAE, right? Meaning he is away in India. So how best the employer can work it out, that is very unfortunate for the employee, but yes, it is very, very difficult for an employer also to make a decision in this way. So that is also one of the reasons probably they have not agreed to renew the contract, but instead send an email. So this definitely would hold a valid communication from the labor or MOHRE if you have to approach. But still the employee is definitely eligible for whatever end of service benefits that his employment contract holds and had been signed off with. So how he can approach with the timeline and things like that, if he has got a communication already, he can definitely say that, okay, I will follow up on that particular so and so date. If he has not got a communication as to when he will get paid, which is September 2020 is well past, and it is like almost more than 6 months, so I'm sure there has to be some communication. If not, you can log in a complaint by getting onto MOHRE website, right? So it is not necessary for you to definitely be here physically in the country. You can be away because your situation is such, and you can log into MOHRE website online, okay, and you can definitely start registering with all the details and communicate that this is your problem, okay. Maybe because you're not here, you will definitely get some kind of number, but generally what happens is the system actually calls or summons the employee and the employer to be present. So if that happens, how are you going to approach that decision is what I am very keen to know, because unless you're here, then it is going to be difficult. But yes, there are ways and means to actually figure this out. You can approach the embassy and you can involve both the governments to actually settle your, it's not a dispute per se, but yes, your problem in terms of getting your end of service received from your employer. So number one is communication and timeline. So try and figure out if they have a definite timeline for you to get paid and what is your plan of action. In fact, because the pandemic has worsened the situation of multiple employers by making very harsh decisions of shutting down the business itself, probably they would definitely, the labor and the human resource embryotization ministry would give a relaxation in terms of splitting the payment, but definitely not being without paying. So definitely you must have an answer. So communicate with the timeline in place and try and register a complaint, and also be prepared if they summon, how you want to address it. Do you want to approach the embassy in the country where you are at and involve the governments to get it resolved, or how is it? Or even if you are able to have a representative here in the UAE whom you can actually think of, you can write a letter, send your legal details, attach it, and ask that particular person to go and represent and log in a complaint. So that is also an option which is very much available.
Wow. Now, I believe the person who asked me this question, I hope you're watching this and I see that you're there. I would request you to do all the research that I believe the communication and all the details. If help required, we will definitely give you all the information. Okay,
Yes.
for the last quick two questions that I would take, because we are already at 8:11,
Right. Yeah.
and Vidya, you have given an enormous information, I must say. Thank you very much for so much detailed information that you have given.
It's the least I
Because I
could do.
must, it's, I loved every word that you have given, because it's a free information that you have just given to a job seeker now who knows how to implement that in his career life. Now, uh, the question here is, uh, can another company lift a ban on me which was placed by the other company?
Yeah, so I think I partially answered the question. Yes, it is very much possible by the other employer, because of the simple facts that the other employer could actually come up with, because one is better position or designation that is going to be printed on the visa when it is being stamped in the passport. The other one is salary, obviously. So whichever salary is better, that could help the employee be lifted with the ban from the newly providing employment opportunity by the employer. Obviously, it is only possible by the employer, in fact, with these two reasons. Yeah, so it's very much possible.
Okay. I'm assuming this would be the last question if this question will go in detail. My limited contract, sorry, my unlimited contract got expired and the employer has forced me to reduce my salary due to the current pandemic to renew my contract, but still the visa is not renewed. What are the issues I will face due to the same?
Okay, so again, because of the pandemic situation, it is very much allowed by the HRE and the labor to not get in the place of letting go of employee, you please reduce the salary, or even let them go on unpaid leave, is what is a mandatory that is given, or the directive that is given by the Ministry of Labor to multiple employers. So it is very much legally acceptable alternate than losing a job or not having an employment. Obviously, any contract, only if it is signed by both the parties, it is a valid one, right? So if the employee is refusing to sign, then there has to be a decision made there. So only if the contract is signed, the employer can move on to making the visa and things like that. So it's obviously mutual and give and take. So if the employee is okay, thinking that what, at the present scenario, I would let go of this salary percentage, but I would definitely want a visa to be here, to live in the country, and to have a work permit, so that my living can actually happen, then yeah, why not? So it's all about give and take.
Well, that's again, I believe that comes again for negotiation, if I'm not wrong, because that's the word that is in my mind whenever
I
I
hope this
just go
session is
through all
not
these
about
things.
negotiation but labor laws.
Thank you very much. So I have a last question. Now I have tried to cover everyone's question. I could not take all questions, but I
Yeah,
did
that's not
cover
practically
everyone's
possible.
question that I have asked. Now the last question would be, I am on my wife's sponsorship. Can I work for a company with their work permit from them while still holding on to my spouse visa?
See, it will be slightly different when it comes to male employees who are on spouse sponsorship and working elsewhere, right? But it is very much possible. Because to get a wife sponsorship itself, you have to meet certain criteria. If you have already passed through the criteria and you're already on the sponsorship, obviously you can actually work. Like I said, your sponsorship of visa is to live inside the country. Your work permit enables you to work. So these are two different elements, right? Just because I'm living inside the country, it is not mandatory for me to actually be working somewhere, right? I can still live in the country without a job if I have a valid visa. But if I don't have a work permit and I'm going to an organization, the employer and the employee equally will be fined. So yeah, it's very
Well,
much
that
possible.
answers. Okay, well, that answers your question. Uh, Thank you very much, audience, for all the questions that you have asked. Now I take a time to say a word of thanks. Vidya, thank you very much for being here and sharing those insightful knowledge that you have given. Now, personally, if I was there, I would have definitely given you a bouquet. But since we are on virtual podium, this is the virtual bouquet for you from Brainciti and Dubai Jobs Hunt. Thank you very much, and I will get personally in touch with you for the questions that have been not answered by the audience. Audience, we promise you that your all your questions would be answered by Vidya. I especially thank audience for being here and being very interactive. Thank you very much for all your support. It wouldn't have been possible without you. Thank you very much, volunteers. We are on all the platforms. We have a website, we are on Telegram, we are on Facebook, and we are also on Instagram right now. So follow us everywhere and be in touch. Brain City is also there on YouTube. They are on Instagram and they are also on WhatsApp groups. Our next episode is on 11th March. So be there with one more amazing speaker with awesome insights. Thank you very much. Now I hand over. Before I end the session, Vidya, your experience on today's session and any areas of improvements that you would like us to focus on.
Thank you so much for the opportunity itself, because it also uh, kind of gave me a reality check as to how much I know and what all I have to brush through. And the process of preparation was really amazing for me as an individual. And I firmly believe the more you share, um, selfishly, you learn a lot as well, right? So that's how one person can actually excel in whatever field that you want. So that's amazing. And I think this group has massively grown, and that is amazing growth that I'm seeing. And I'm like so happy that I'm a part of this, though a very small portion, but I'm really very happy that I could actually share whatever things that I know out of my experience. Had I made some kind of deviation, or if I had not really addressed any questions, I'm really sorry, but I'm always available. I would love to answer questions, whatever you have in mind, to the best of the knowledge and ability that I have got. So I'm so looking forward to actually be associated very frequently with all of you guys. So thank you so much, the entire team of Dubai Job Hunt. Have a very lovely weekend and good evening.
Thank you very much, Vidya, and thank you very much for everyone who is online. Thank you very much for all your questions. I did receive your questions. I hope that our answers from an expert, I would say, as Avil said, she is a dictionary of a legal advisor. So now I would hand over the stage to Avil for a few words. Over to you, Avil, the game changer of the Buy Jobs Hunt.
Thank you so much, Vibrant Venzil and Vivacious Vidya, for this insightful session. I'm so grateful to you for offering your voluntary time to share your wisdom, knowledge, expertise to all of us. I gained a lot of insights from whatever that you shared. Although being in HR and living in UAE for last 8 years, sometimes we feel that, okay, there are a lot of things to learn. And thanks for connecting the dots. And I go back to our days of 2017, sometime in November. You had conducted a session for when Dubai Jobs Hunt was just a baby, actually. And because of all your support, we have reached where we are today with so many people have gained employment. They are thriving in their life and career. So the whole motive of Dubai Jobs Hunt is to educate, evolve, and enrich individuals. So I think people like Vidya are helping us to do that. So thank you so much, Vidya, once again. You're on mute. You're on mute.
in whatever little way that I could contribute, I think you are the pillar and you have really pushed everyone's ability to the best. So that is why this has grown immensely, massively.
Thank you. Thank you.